And we're on to 4 o'clock. So welcome, folks. My name's Andrea Marks, and this is the very last session before the conference closing. Can't believe it. It's just flown. But it's really good to see you here, and I'm sure there'll be more that just jump across in the next few minutes. This is Greg Holdaway's presentation called BodyMinded Principles for Safe and Healthy Musical Education. Greg Holdaway is the Director of Training of BodyMinded Alexander Technique based in Sydney. He has almost 30 years of experience assisting musicians to recover from injury and improve performance, and has trained professional Alexander teachers for many years. He offers classes and private lessons to musicians and performers in person and online, as well as in-depth training to those wishing to learn more about incorporating BodyMinded Alexander Technique principles into their personal and professional lives. And as I was reading all this, I thought, oh, after the few days sitting in front of the computer, we might well have some principles we can take away that we should have been using for the last 3 days. Just before Greg starts, I would like to just acknowledge all the countries, I guess, that we are on, or the entire country. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands, plural, on which we meet today. I'd also like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. Now, Greg particularly is on one of those lands, and I'm going to hand over to him to say what that land is and to continue and tell us all he has, and for us to hopefully join in.
Okay, thank you, Andrea, and welcome. It's fantastic to see you all here. Gunagara country is where I'm standing at the moment. So with respect to the elders and the current community here as well. Yes, well, today we hope to be as active as possible. And I know you've spent a lot of time over the last few days, perhaps sitting in front of your computer screen, as Andrea was saying. So very keen to get us moving. It is a workshop-oriented class. So what I'd like to do is to collect some questions, requests about activities. I think in the notes I did say that you could bring your musical instruments if you have particular instruments that you'd like to explore with me on screen. This is an interesting experience to run a workshop like this, because I've done this for so many years face-to-face in conferencing situations and so on. And here we are seeing if we can kind of map that process onto a Zoom process. So we'll see how well we go. But do, as we go through the presentation and or even now, start thinking about what kind of movement, activity, question in relation to performance, technical skills, or some of the foundations of the way that we coordinate with instruments, both for your own interest, what might be of value to you, but also questions about teaching are very welcome. So we're going to switch back for a moment to the slideshow. And, wouldn't you know it, with technology? I tested it with Andrea a minute ago, and you're going to need to tell me if you do see what's coming up on the screen, because it went all blank on me a second ago. So here we go. So let's take a look at what's going on with the PowerPoint. Why is the PowerPoint not presenting? So here we go. So
yep, we can all see that now.
You can see that. So we're going to go through a series of principles. Not sure if we'll be able to discuss or work with all of them. But the first thing is just about movability, because in order to change the way that you coordinate, or in order to function well with your instrument performance, everything needs to be able to move. So to some extent, you may be able to do these activities sitting, but it would be preferable if you have a little bit of space to be able to come up to standing. You won't need a lot of space, but enough space to swing your arms around and move a little bit. So go ahead and organize yourself from that. That's it. If you wish to, you can leave your camera off, or if you're comfortable, you can put your cameras on so that we kind of can see. And so that helps me a lot, because then I can see how people are engaging with the material and participating. Welcome either way, but it would be good if your camera was on for a little bit of this so that I can see what you're doing. Once we've done a little bit of this, I'm going to ask for those questions. So, have that in your mind. We're going to start in a very simple way. you know, musicians do all kinds of things. It's a big topic, playing, being a performer, being a teacher. Not always, but often those things start with the use of the fingers and the hands. So we're just going to wiggle your fingers a little bit like that. Looking at where your fingers are wiggling from. So, you know, a little hello everybody moment. And then wiggling your thumbs and looking at where your thumbs are wiggling from. So you can see that the fingers wiggle from about 1/3 of the way down into the palm, and the thumb is wiggling from near the wrist, so that the length of the thumb and movement is kind of equivalent to the length of the middle finger. So have a little think about that. Wiggle your fingers again, take a look like that. There we go. Then we're going to move to the movements at the wrist. So you've obviously got movements that go inwards and outwards. You've got movements that go sideways, noticing that the movement that goes sideways is a little bit more on the little finger side than on the thumb side, so that you can wiggle the hand side to side, but more one way than the other, forwards and backwards. If you combine those together, you can create a kind of scooping movement of the hands. So you're sweeping your hands around, which is a combination of those 4 directions of movement. You all know that you can turn your hands over in order to reach an instrument or to do any kind of gesture. So if you're conducting, doing the gestures really involve this movement of the whole forearm, turning of the hand down, the turning of the hand up, turning the hand down, turning the hand up. There are a couple of interesting things about this. One of them is to notice to what extent your elbows might be moving when you're doing this. Or maybe your elbows are not really moving and they're kind of close to the side of your body, tied to the side of your body. Just observing for yourself how much movement is occurring in the rest of your arm as you turn your hands over. And then we're going to do it quickly, like that. Just give them a shake. Like that. Okay. Moving to the movements of the forearm, just a very simple arm, a little bit of an arm swing. And you can see again the gesture of the fingers moving or the hand moving in space. We're going to talk a little bit about this as one of the principles for good coordination, is the attention to the pathway of the part or the instrument, the hand, the finger, whatever it is in space. And here you're looking at this little sort of 3/4 circle that the hand goes through. Thinking about the circle, you notice that when you think about that, then you're somehow in cooperation with the way that the elbow works. The elbows work kind of like a hinge. And so if you think about the pathway of the hand, you're coming into cooperation with the way that the elbow works a little bit. We make it a slightly bigger swing. We've got the fingers, the thumbs, the wrists, your forearms, your elbows, and now the larger sweep of the whole arm. Thinking again to see, just experience for yourself how nicely your whole arm can swing nice and easily, a larger arc. And there's a combination now between each of those actions, what your fingers are doing, what your wrists are doing. Notice that as my hands swing, as your hands swing, you could turn your hand over at the height of each swing so that you're leading the action with the back of the hand. So back of the hand, back of the hand. So at the top and at the back of the swing, you might be turning your hand over, which gives you that forearm action, the elbow and the shoulders. Just for a quick moment, take a moment to feel across the top of your shoulders until you feel this bony plate. There's a bony plate, and you can find the edge of that, the edge of the bone on the top of the shoulder, and then move your arm around a little bit and think about the ball and socket joint. There's a joint right underneath where your fingers are. This is for some musicians, for some students, kids in particular, but or for anybody really, it can be surprising how wide that is. This movement of the shoulder and the movement of the whole arm is right out on the outside. It's the most shallow joint in the body. So when you do these kind of chicken wing movements like that, and there's movement occurring right out here. That's right, so I can go around. Now, what you might have noticed is that as soon as you started doing that and moving the whole of the arm, that your shoulder girdle starts moving. And this is the next really key piece of information about coordination of hands and arms. Is that with this arm swing, you can see perhaps on the screen, you can feel in yourself, that there's a natural movement of your shoulder girdle. So we'll take a moment to shrug the shoulders up and down. Okay. Notice that I mean, it's kind of obvious thing to say, but you can't shrug your shoulders without moving your whole arm, right? That's because your shoulders are part of your arms. And if you feel now your collarbone or your clavicle and feel across towards the center, and you find a bump where the collarbone joins on to your sternum, the bone in the middle. You feel that little bump. And if you feel that with one hand and then move the other arm around, you'll feel that collarbone moving. You feel your collarbone moving? Is there anybody who can't feel their collarbone move? By the way, I do a lot of teaching like this. You're very welcome to unmute yourself and speak at any point if you want. If you've got a question or a request or I don't understand that, just unmute yourself and you're welcome to speak. So yeah, that looks like somebody might be going to. What's the question? Oh, still can't hear you. All right, well, maybe we'll come back to it. Well, just with that in mind, I forgot to ask you actually, as those kinds of questions come up and you think about things in relation to your own playing or your own teaching, please make a note in the chat, because as we progress through the session, we're going to move into doing demonstrations and answering practical questions for people with instruments and actions. To do that, I need a pile of questions. So go ahead and if you thought of something, put it in the chat. Andrea will keep track of them for us and make sure that we can work our way through. Hopefully we'll get through whatever questions are asked. This particular movement that we've been looking at when you're moving your arms like this is now reflected in the way that your shoulder girdle bounces up and down with your arms when you move your arms. This is such an interesting and key piece of information. When you raise your hands up, your shoulders go up. And when you bring your arms down, your shoulders are moving along with the rest of the arm. So for example, when you're bringing your hands onto a keyboard, there's going to be movement in the shoulder girdle because the shoulder girdle must move with your arm because it's part of your arm. Let's do a little rolling forward. And I'm encouraging you to think about this rolling action as a part of a warm-up to roll forward rather than to roll backward. People are often very used to this trying to roll the shoulders backward, which generates a bunch of pressure and stress in the back of the neck and the top of the shoulder. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is perhaps further down the track, or if there's a question about that. This rolling of the shoulder girdle forward reflects the way that the arms move when you bring them forwards to lift instruments, to work with your drums or your glockenspiel or to play the piano, whatever it is that you're doing. There's action of the whole system which goes forward, and that includes the shoulder girdle. So let's go back to this again for a moment, just like that. Okay. All right, is that good so far? Everyone happy? Everyone clear? All right. Okay. So one more thing, and then we're going to start into actions and activities. We'll see. So take a look towards the floor. And when you look towards the floor, then notice what direction your body moved in. And just looking back up again, again, these things are very clear and straightforward and easy to understand, but often not particularly clear in thinking about how you coordinate with an instrument or in music, that when you look forward, your body wants to curl forward. You will see under some circumstances, a situation where a person tilts their head forward to look towards the floor and they take their body backward. And if you look towards the floor and you lift your chest and take yourself torso backward, it kind of jams. It creates this little bit of pressure. You feel that. Very relevant for, embouchure questions and so on when we're talking about various instruments. So when you look at your head and body and you take a look forward, your spine will curl forward a little bit. And then take a look up the wall and just as far as you're comfortable up towards the ceiling. And notice that naturally enough that the opposite happens. So that when you look up towards the ceiling, that your spine and your torso wants to arch up and backwards. And that arching or that little bit of shift doesn't have to be a big movement, but there'll be a little shift through your whole spine, which includes the movement of your pelvis and your legs. So when you think about this looking up, the gesture of that movement comes all the way from the ground up through the crown of your head, so that the whole body is moving in the gesture of looking up. Even though you might see a lot more movement at the top, actually the whole body is involved in moving in that action. So let's do it a couple of times. So you look towards the floor, and then everything wants to curl forward. Spine wants to curl forward. You look up towards the ceiling. Everything wants to curl backward, comes all the way from the ground. And then one more time, and we're looking towards the floor. Maybe give yourself a bit of a wiggle, curling over, and then just coming back to, yeah. You know, that capacity to be able to move easily forward, to curl forward, is such a key element in coordination. And we often see people with a way of moving or a way of coordinating, which is creating some restriction in the capacity for the body to be able to curve forward easily. And you know, perhaps for yourself, I know a lot of people have various kinds of discomforts and stresses, particularly maybe lower back or neck or shoulder question. And then very often a little bit of curling over, and you go, oh, that feels so nice. That feels so good. It's such a relief. It's like, oh. And that tells you something about the way in which you're organizing yourself to stand, that there's a little more stress in your neck and your back than needs to be there for the purpose of just standing or supporting or playing or conducting, for that matter. So capacity to curl forward, capacity to move up and back a little, all the way from the ground. And we're going to combine that action with an action of the hands and the fingers. Okay. These little activities are things that I've often taught to musicians and to kids, musician groups, as a process of waking up the movement and the sensation of the movement of the whole self, the whole body, as a preliminary warm-up, as a way of bringing yourself into a state of mind and a state of body so that you can begin warming up with your instrument or with your voice, whatever the activity is that you're coming into. So it's a kind of warm-up. There's a whole variety of them. I'll show you the beginnings. So you're going to put your little fingers together like this, scooping your hands out like that. And then scooping the hands as if you were throwing water on your face. And keep the movement going so that you roll through the back of the fingers touching all the way around. So now your index fingers are touching, and we have it almost like a little bit of a stretch. It comes up this way. Then we're doing the opposite action. So you're scooping outwards and around and back to where we started. Again, notice that these actions in one way are involving and coordinating and moving all of the joints and the movements that we started with a little while ago. Once you've got that a little bit clear in your mind, it rolls outwards and then it rolls inwards, outwards and inwards, nice and easy. These are about patterns of movement and mobilization more than about exercise. It's not about load. It's just about movement and the enjoyment of moving in your joints like that. So once you've got that clear, next time it comes around, as your hands are coming up and around like this, you can let your arms swing by your side, and then they come back up and you catch your hands back in the beginning position with the little fingers together. So around and swing and around and swing and around. Maybe you notice that when I'm doing this, that now, and you will notice for yourself that your whole body wants to move more with the action. We were saying before that when you move your hands and your arms, or when you look upwards and downwards, the whole body is moving. And this is our second fundamental principle. Whatever action you're doing, no matter how technical or how small, or whatever the action is that you're doing, it always involves in some way the coordination of the whole self. The body is supported with relation to gravity. So as we're doing these motions, there's one thing that I hope to be true for all of you, which I think is true for those I can see, and that is that nobody's fallen over. And the reason you haven't fallen over is because we have this wonderful, natural, buoyant, supporting mechanism, which is underneath or supporting all of the actions that we do, which enables us to be well supported with regards to gravity, and which enables the timing, the sequencing, the rhythm of the movements of all of the parts of the body to function together to serve the purpose, to serve the thing that you're asking yourself to do, which, as we said, could well be instrumental playing or singing, conducting.
Greg? Someone's
Yeah.
just asked, are there similarities in the Alexander technique with Tai Chi?
Yeah, actually, I have a very eclectic background with all of this. I love doing this, teaching this, and I've done a lot of all kinds of movement training, including a certain amount of Tai Chi. I love Tai Chi. I think Tai Chi is wonderful. It really is. And in fact, I was going to do a quick call out to Lynn Richardson from earlier in the conference. Oh, there you are, because because I really enjoyed your Qigong activity class earlier on. There is a lot of overlap in the principles of what we're working with and the way you might apply them for health and well-being for things like Qigong and Tai Chi. In particular, I mean, there was another presentation, escapes me, who were talking about imaging the music. And when you're playing music, you're creating in your mind the music that you wish, whether that's an auditory form or in some other form, it's a mental activity. And that image of the music or that idea of the music is what's driving the patterning, which essentially is what creates the movement for the instrument or the vocal mechanism. And we often have a conception of action, which is, I have to make it happen. I have to do the right thing to make my instrument work. And what you discover as you study these kinds of principles, Tai Chi, Qigong, Alexander technique, is that it's the conception, the way that you're thinking in relation to what you're feeling and sensing in your body, which is generating the actual movement. Well, essentially what that means in practice is that it's a lot easier to do things than you think it is. People might think it's always trying too hard. You know, everybody's trying too hard, and the trying too hard makes a bunch of tension, which gets in the way. So yeah, Qigong, Tai Chi, I could talk a lot more about that, but I love it. Fabulous.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, nothing more at this stage, so go for it.
Okay. All right. So where are we? Oh, we just finished this little warm up. And so we're doing this with this little swing. Notice that this has the movement of the head and the body over the feet. So a little bit, not exactly the same, but a little bit like before when I talked about looking forward and noticing that your body wanted to go forward. This brings you into an orientation which is up and over your legs or up and over your feet. And for those of you who are comfortable, who've done enough of this to get a sense of it, with the little swing of the hands now, as the hands swing the other way, they can go over your head. So your hands go around and you've got the arm swing, and then they go around, and this time they keep going around. Bend your elbows so that your hands can go a little up and behind. The amount of movement, how far your hands go behind, is going to depend upon the freedom and the comfort that you have in your shoulder girdle. So it may be that your hands only just kind of come to the crown of your head, which would be just fine. Or it may be that you find that you've got the flexibility and your arms go a little further behind. But now we're turning it into a more of a whole action, forwards and backwards. And some of you perhaps are already getting a little sense of this, that with this movement, then there's a natural tendency to want to look up just a little. No big deal, but you're looking up the wall or up towards the ceiling a little as your hands go up. And we talked about how your spine and your pelvis and your legs will all be involved in that action. Your head and your spine, you look up, and your head and your body, and you're looking over, and then you're looking up, and then you're looking over. And we'll just do it one more time. Looking up and looking over. You know, this is the degree to which you take these movements is really dependent upon what you're comfortable with. As I said before, this is not about exercise per se, though I personally use this kind of routine as a part of my routine before exercising, doing like, you know, bigger things, or yoga. I've done a lot of yoga as well. But this is about waking up the sense of movement, how everything is moving when you move, not just part of you, how the directions are important, where my hands are going in space, where my head and my spine and my pelvis are organizing as I'm moving in space. And it's just kind of getting that easy sense of how everything works together. That's what we're aiming to do to begin with. Okay, so any questions about all of that so far? All good?
Folks, if you want to put it, turn yourself off mute and ask, go for it. No, I think we're right to keep going.
All right. Very good. Think about your instrument, because I know that there are some instruments in the rooms with you. And for those who wish to, or those brave individuals, we'll we'll be looking at those shortly. Okay, so these kind of works, I've worked a lot with musicians and music teachers over many years, and there's always kind of fundamental questions that come up, particularly with relation to teaching kids, or teaching generally, but often in relation to teaching kids. You know, how do we help them to sit well? How do we help them to sit correctly? How do we help them to stand correctly? You know, what do we do about all the pulling back that you see when they pick up the horn or whatever the instrument is that you're playing? So we'll do a couple of foundational things about that. But just reminding that what we've said so far, essentially that movability is a key to good coordination. That stiffness or the prevention of movement, for whatever reason, whether it's because you think you're supposed to stand or move in a correct way and therefore you're preventing other things from happening, or whether it's because you have some kind of discomfort, or indeed whether it's because you've become a little bit confused or overwhelmed by the task that you're doing, which is complex and challenging, and you've got to think a whole lot about your fingers and where they go and what's going on, and then everything else stiffens as a consequence of just trying to get movement in the hands and the arms, which then you often see a tendency to stiffen in the torso. The biomechanics people have a name for that. I don't exactly remember what it is. It's something about the degrees of freedom. They talk about locking off some degrees of freedom so that you can enable other degrees of freedom. Good coordination and improvement when you've got difficulty, generally speaking, is going to involve understanding and working with the movability of the whole self. That doesn't mean you have to move all the bits on purpose. I don't have to know what I'm doing with my toes when I'm playing necessarily, but you want it all to be movable. So the tightening or the stiffening gets in the way of movability. And then the second principle that we've talked about is that in that context, anything that I do, whether it's with my voice, with my hands or arms, instruments, conducting, always involves the coordination of the whole self. And I know that some of that won't be news to many of you, perhaps. You'll all appreciate that. How to teach it, how to think about it in terms of your own coordination, perhaps we can help with that a little bit. But certainly, if my legs are stiff so that I can move my arms, then that will create a pressure which limits performance, but also gives you the risk of pressure injury potentially. Or if any other part is stiffening, particularly the lower back or your neck, if there's a holding, which is a part of the action that you're doing, then it gets in the way of the coordination of the whole system. Okay. So sitting. Have we got a brave person who wants to show us them sitting? Coming onto a chair. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people I can see on screen at the moment. Who wants to? I've got a chair.
To it, so if someone else can give it a try.
Okay, we have.
Rachel,
I need to move my mouse to see your name.
Yep, Rachel,
yeah, come on, Rachel. Let's take a look. It's coming up to standing. We don't worry about going off the screen a little bit. That's fine. We're just looking at the way that you're moving. You've got your chair there. So what you're going to do? Yeah, that's great. If you can swing it a little sideways so that we can look at your.
I'll make it less blurry in the background. That will help, won't it? I've blurred my background. There we go.
Oh, there you go.
That
You become very clear. That's great. So yeah, turn the chair a little sideways, and then just have a seat for us. Yeah, and as I said before, most of what we're teaching, certainly in the context of building up a consciousness of how to coordinate well, it's so obvious and straightforward when you know what you're looking at or what you're thinking about. It's not that big a deal, but it's the sort of thing you do. I don't know, how many times do you get in and out of a chair every day? I don't know. Like, it's just uncountable, really. And virtually every time you do it, you've got your mind somewhere else. Virtually every time you do it, you're thinking about something else. I'm sitting down to work at the computer. I'm getting up to get a cup of tea. I'm doing something, right? So a little bit of what we're doing is teaching you how to just observe. And the weird thing about observing is that as soon as you start to observe yourself moving, it's going to feel weird, right? So if I say, notice how your arm moves when you pick your arm up, your arm is going to feel a little weird, just for the fact that you're paying attention to it when you're not used to. That's so normal. That's the way that it's supposed to be. And in fact, especially teaching kids, as soon as we start teaching and working with instruments and things, and they go, oh, this is so weird. And then we know, yes, now we're in the territory. because that weird sensation tells you that you're doing something genuinely different or new relative to your habit or what you're used to. Okay, so when we saw, it's Rachel, isn't it? Your name disappeared from my screen again. Rachel, when we saw Rachel sit down, we could really only see the top part of her body, which is fine. Where did her body, remember I talked about the head and the spine this way and the head and the spine this way? When she sits down, is her head moving in the same direction as her body or in a different direction? Go ahead and do it again. Let's take a look. Yeah, like that. And like that. So interesting. What do you think? Yeah. So is it okay, Rachel, to be talking about this? Yeah.
Oh,
You happy?
Yeah.
Because you see, there are two basic strategies, you might say, or maybe three, for getting yourself on a chair. Hundreds of different ways of getting on a chair. No correct way. You can be well coordinated to get on a chair in any particular way that you like, right? Anything is fine. To be well coordinated is the question. So you're not putting unnecessary stress on yourself. Okay. Three basic strategies or two basic strategies that people use. You're either starting by taking your bottom backwards. So you're pointing your bottom towards the chair, right? That's a very, take a look around the world and you'll see that a lot. That's one way. Another way is people sometimes just bend their legs, right? So it's like going up and down. And then a third possibility is that you would go forward, that the body's going forward so that I can bend my legs so that I can sit on the chair. I don't know how well you can see me from where you are, but you can possibly see that there's a difference in the ease with which these different patterns occur. So with Rachel's permission, we're going to ask you, because if I ask you, Rachel, what of those three do you reckon you're doing?
The third one.
This one, like this?
Leaning forward and yeah.
Okay, so
Well,
let's take a look.
It could be the first or the third. I couldn't decide.
There's some kind of combination between the two, because if you push your bottom backwards, then your torso is going to lean forward, right?
Yeah.
Because if you push your bottom backwards and your torso doesn't lean forward, you'll fall over. Everything balances, right? Yeah. What did you find out doing again?
I'm not sure.
Okay, that's good. So let's help you again with it. So let's really.
I put my bottom out first.
I think you might be putting your bottom out first, and the reflection of the bottom going out first is the tendency for your head to want to go backwards. And we could see that we can't see your whole body, but we could see that in the movement, that as you're going this way, that this wants to happen. Yeah. The relation between the head and the pelvis and movement and balance, they're always moving together. If somebody's out of balance up here, there'll be something going on down here, and vice versa. It's because your spine is flexible and your head is the top of the spine and your pelvis is the bottom of the spine, and they link together as a system. So Rachel, come on up to standing again, just for a moment, if that's okay. Just take a moment to, before you begin moving, take a moment to consider the direction of your head and your torso. I'm going to think about my head and my torso going over my feet. It'll be a little weird. You're taking your head and your torso over your feet, and you bend your legs so you can have a seat. You go over your feet to see the chart like that. That's quite different. What does it feel like to do it like that?
Easy.
It felt kind of easy.
Yeah.
And from our perspective in terms of observing, you can see that little bit of pressure in your neck that was there originally has disappeared. It wasn't there in that movement. We're really made to balance and to coordinate forward organized. That doesn't mean you can't do things backwards. You can do things backwards, but we're made to do things easily in front of us. And one of the weird things about sitting as an activity is that the chair's behind you. And as soon as you think about moving towards the chair behind you, it makes you move backward. And when you move backward, you come off your feet. And that makes everything stiffen. Your legs stiffen. You hold your breath a little bit. You get a little bit of pressure in your neck and your back because the system is trying to stop you from falling. We actually balance most easily over the feet. And the feet generally point somewhat forwards. So some people might be more outwards, some might be whatever with the feet, but the feet are kind of pointing forwards. So you're bringing the weight of your head and your body over your feet so that you can bend your legs. And notice that the thinking has my head and my body moving so that I can do the action rather than start with move the legs. The middle pattern, by the way, is that pattern, the one that it's very relevant for Tai Chi, actually. I'm thinking about the Qigong. Qigong and Tai Chi are wonderful, but it is possible to harm yourself doing them if you've got some poor coordination. And I have worked with people helping with that. So the action of going straight down tends to be organized very much in the legs, and that can create a lot of pressure in the knees. So this action of going straight down is still the head and the body organizing with in relation to gravity, so that my knees can bend, and then you get this beautiful fluid way of moving because you're well supported with regards to gravity. If your action is pushing towards the ground, your joints will compress, you go somewhat out of balance, everything works harder, and it becomes more stressful. In a pattern like that, you're just used to moving the way you are, and it feels kind of normal. But over time, that kind of pressure can build up to the point where it can become a real problem. But it also, you kind of lose something in the enjoyment, in the enjoyment of what it feels like to move well, to be well supported and buoyant and free, right? So that's a little bit of a beginning about sitting, thinking about the action being, I'm going over my feet in order to bend my legs. And if you do it in the beginning, it feels kind of artificial because it's weird because you don't normally think about it like that. But it's just an orientation in space. And as you get a little familiar with that, then it just becomes something that you're comfortable, it's just as comfortable. In fact, it's more comfortable than doing it the other way. You kind of notice if you're pulling back, you go, oh, I want to go over my feet. I want to be supported by my feet. Yeah, feet point forward. Okay. Then you're on the chair. So what's the most typical question? I'm assuming that most of you do work with children, though maybe you don't, maybe you work with adults. What's the most typical question about sitting? What do you?
For me, Greg, it's not necessarily the sitting down, it's the how they then continue is the slouch.
Right.
And what they can do, especially when they're playing.
So the most typical question about the sitting is how do we stop them from slouching? And you know that this is a problem, that if there's a downward collapsing pressure, that's going to make it hard to breathe, and it's going to make it hard to support, and everything gets more fatigued, and there's a kind of emotional tone to it, which is the kind of hang out, oh my God, I'll just do this because you said I had to kind of tone comes into the quality of engagement, so it's all kind of related like that. And yet, what would be the opposite? What do we typically ask a student to do? If you don't want them doing that, what do you tell them to do?
Sitting,
That's right.
sitting on the front of the seat almost.
So maybe sitting further away from the back of the chair so they're not, or what? I could see somebody speak up. Tell me what you tell me. Why don't you all show me sitting really correctly? Go on, make yourself really sit correctly so I can see what you're.
There's that expression like stand from the waist up.
Like stand from the waist up. Okay, there's an expression. Okay, yeah. What did you do? What do you notice? Is it easier or not so easy? What direction did you move in? And how long are you going to be comfortable sitting like that? Those are the sorts of questions. Okay.
I think feet flat on the floor is very important for students when they're playing their instruments and sitting at the edge of their chair with a straight back as well.
Yes, great. So now we're in the territory we want to be in. Those are the sorts of questions. Exactly. So, exactly. So, have you ever seen a small child play the piano with their legs dangling? Or, play an instrument with their legs dangling? And they do it so beautifully. You ever seen that? There's poised little kid and they're like, and their legs are just kind of hanging. They're kind of used to sitting like that. Often much more difficult for an adult to do that, to sit on the edge of a table with your legs dangling and be very comfortable and poised and balanced, and yet possible to do. The support of the ground under your feet contributes to the support and the sense of where you are in space. So it really is important. I'm not saying not to do that. I think it's a really useful and important thing to be conscious of, but it's also important to be conscious of the fact that there's no one right way, that it's possible to coordinate well without your feet on the floor. Think about the wonderful organ players that maybe some of you have worked with. I've worked with some wonderful organ players. I just get astonished. It's like dancing. They've got the multiple banks and they're doing this, and their feet are doing that, and the other foot's doing that, and it's all happening simultaneously. And you kind of go, how on earth do they do that? They're moving with their feet and their hands and their arms and their whole body together. And it's a simple question. What are they balancing on when they do that? What are you balancing on when you're sitting and moving and playing and whatever?
Core. Use your core.
Okay, but well, that's another one of those great things we'll come back to. That's right. I've got a whole lot of stuff about the core. So, but that's not what you balance on. You're balancing on your chair, right? You're all Aussies and we're all adults, so you can use adult Aussie language if you like.
Your
You're
butt.
balancing on your bottom.
bones.
You're balancing on your bum. You're
Your
balancing
bottom.
on your bottom. Yeah. So, or your bottom bones, which, slightly more technically, we might say sitting bones, or extremely technically, we'd say ischial tuberosities. Think about, that's the fancy name. Think about bicycle seat, right? So a bicycle seat is wider at the back and narrower at the front. So your sitting bones or your bottom bones narrow. As you roll forward, you move on to the pubic bones and you're getting a little more narrow. And when you roll back, you get right back onto the base of the pelvis. I mean, looking at this little model, which by the way came from Aldi, and I'm like, what was Aldi thinking? Bringing little skeletons into Australia and selling them. Oh, I loved it. It was great. There's a skeleton. So this is lower down than this, right? What am I touching up here? That's the coccyx, or the base of the spine. So you can see that you don't sit on the base of your spine. You sit on the base of the pelvis. And the base of the pelvis is quite solid and roundy shaped, made to be able to rock forwards and backwards and move around on really pretty easily. So when you come to sit like that and you roll forward, you'll notice your legs will want to move a little bit. And the sense of pressure, it goes under your thighs, but if your legs are movable, there won't be a lot of pressure under your thighs. You'll actually feel the pressure get a little narrower because your pubic bones get narrower towards the front. It's one of the reasons if I sit on the edge of the chair and now look how easily my legs can move, which is part of that whole, somebody was saying, sitting, or haven't addressed the question of straight yet, but sitting on the edge of the chair with the feet on the floor, and you get this great freedom, the capacity to roll backwards and forwards, the capacity for the legs to move in any direction, in any way, just like an organ player. You're not actually relying upon the legs to brace you in relation to gravity. Whereas if you try and do the question about what does it mean to sit straight? Well, the first thing is to appreciate that there's no such thing as straight in the human body, right? We are not straight. We're flexible and movable, and the spine is very curvy. We're organized to do things up and forwards in space, not straight up, but up in order to be able to do things forward, like that. If you think about making yourself as tall as possible, then something very interesting. It is the same as riding a push bike. I can see that in the comments. That's exactly what it's like. So you can roll forward and still have your legs moving freely when you're on a bike. Think about making yourself as tall as possible. And you think that's going right through the body. And this has got this conception, sometimes it's got this conception of straight in it. And now I'm going to show you an analogy to that, which is very relevant for using the hands for instrumental playing, particularly piano, but other instruments as well. If you take your hand and try and make your fingers as long as possible, really stretch out your hand. So yeah, we've got a beautiful example over here, and I'm just going to see it's Wendy Fullerton. You've got this beautiful example. You can see this as you really stretch your fingers out. What direction do your fingers end up going? Yeah, I can hear you. I can see you speaking, but I can't. But you're right, you're gesturing. So if you really try and get your fingers to be longer, stretch the hand out, your fingers will go backwards. Now, that's such a significant piece of information when it comes to playing a musical instrument. You really don't want your fingers going backwards because you're playing a set of keys. You're doing something with your hand which is wrapping around an instrument. You want the fingers to be available to freely move forwards, right? So the idea of really stretching the hand out, I've worked with a number of pianists who are playing Rachmaninoff. I know professional pianists, they just rephrase it actually to make it work for themselves, because it's pretty impossible for a lot of people. Trying to make the hand bigger. And as soon as you try to make the hand bigger, the extensor musculature, the musculature which pulls the fingers back, goes on. and the hand becomes very stiff. This is this classic, what do they call it? The collapsed knuckle. The collapsed knuckle is a reflection of that kind of pattern. Because if I stretch my hand out like that and then I bend my fingers, the knuckle will go down rather than the conception of the hand going over. So I'm working through the fingertip onto the key, right? So these are the sort of classical problems that are always coming up with students and with people. Anyway, for the moment, just to see that the hand is organized to curve and curl forward, so the full dimension of the full width of the hand will still have a sense of being able to do things forward. And if you get to the point where you're no longer able to send the fingers, you've started to overextend, and you can do that, which is what the problem is, because they all do it, and you end up with really stiff hands, right? So exactly the same thing with your spine. If you try and make yourself too tall, too straight, as it were, in terms of sitting, well, then you'll go up like this. And when you really think about that, notice what happens. What happens is your chest starts to go upwards. And your chest cannot go upwards without arching your back. So that's not going up, that's not getting taller, that's leaning backwards. And it's just universal. You just see in all kinds of instrumental playing, this tendency to be leaning backwards, right? There are other reasons other than the just trying to be too tall reason, but that is one of the reasons why people get that pattern. We're made to balance over the spine, over the front of the spine. Think about that for a moment. Where's the front of your spine? Just think about that from this, right? Just like we're made to balance with the head and the body over the feet, and the feet are generally pointing somewhat forwards. We're made to organize so that if the musculature relaxed, we would fall forward. That's actually quite safe. If you're going to fall sometime, or if you're in a situation like that and you want to go forward, because then you've got your hands and your legs can catch you and you can run and all those things. Falling backwards is dangerous and scary. We're not set up for going, we don't want to be going that way. We want to be going in a direction which comes off the earth so that we can do things easily forward over the front of the spine. So the same conception is that if you ask your students to be straight, the chances are they will over straight. They'll really do it. And if they over straight, then they're going to be stiff. That stiffness will create discomfort, but it has a dramatic effect on the way in which the hands and the arms can function, because now the whole shoulder girdle is pulling back with the back, when actually you want your hands and arms doing something in front of you. So you start to see in a very straightforward way what it is that generates some of these patterns of stiffness and discomfort for people. As usual, I've got 50 times more content than I can possibly present to you tonight. So looking at where we are with the time, but I'll just give you a conception, an idea about this that might help with the slumpy people. The first thing is, what I'm suggesting is let them remain movable and being kind of relaxed, letting everything be movable. So rather than making myself sit upright, which will activate that musculature in the back that we've talked about, what I'm going to suggest you do is to have them rock and roll on their bottom, rolling forwards and backwards, wiggling your bottom, roll forwards and backwards. You can stay quite relaxed as you do that. You roll forward and your bottom moves, and you roll back and your bottom moves on the chair. Yeah, that rock and roll so that everything's moving, including the pelvis. And then look at what it is that you're doing, or you're looking at the music, you're looking at the conductor, you're looking across the room, whatever it is that you're doing in front of you, you're paying attention to where the instrument is going if you're lifting up an instrument. So you've got this rocking and rolling, and then the instrument comes up and you've rolled on your bottom. And what you'll discover is that generates a natural buoyancy or a natural uprightness in the way in which the people move, which avoids the tendency for over stiffness. It helps the person to be flexible and fluid, but balancing well over the top of their bones. All of these suggestions are they're fundamental, and you need to experiment a little bit, and it will be different with every student, as I know you all know as teachers, but it gives you an idea, a principle, something that you can begin to experiment with. Okay, so have we got any other questions yet?
No more
Andrew?
sign of any questions at the moment, so I think press on, because we haven't got all that long left, of course.
We've got all that long left. But well, before we
hang
do
on.
that,
So
okay.
someone's just coming on. We've got two just rushing in. Oh, saying I often allow my littlies to stand at the piano while they play. Some piano teachers are adamant kids should be shown how to sit correctly on the bench. What's your view on this? And then someone's also then said, imagine elastic bands from hips to ribs. Is that a good analogy for posture? So double whammy there.
Okay, so clearly there's a need to address this question and a desire to address the question.
Yeah.
Sounds like it. Yep. Sorry, I've got others in the background.
The other sound in the background. Okay, so there's a real need to question about how do I create instructions in order to address these questions. There's a little bit of a formal process in this. I won't have time to explain it to you completely, but it's there in the slides. We might skip through in a moment. But the first thing is that we are adaptable and movable, and it's possible to be well coordinated doing anything that's humanly possible. You can play the piano sitting on the floor. I've seen people do it. You can play the piano standing up. You can play the piano leaning over to one side. I've seen people do it, leaning over, sitting on the stool and lean over and still play the piano. You can play the piano. I've actually seen people play the piano. It takes a little practice. I'm not saying it doesn't take practice, but you can play the piano with your hands behind you. It's not easy to do, but it can be done and it can be done well. So as we move away from the natural way in which the body is structured, things get harder to do. That doesn't mean that you can't do them. It just means it takes a bit more work to figure out how to do it well without unnecessary pressure. So when they say how to sit correctly, what I would suggest is give the kids the experience and the permission to do all the varieties. Keep asking, what other way is there? So it's like, okay, you can sit like this, and what's that like? Okay, and you can sit like this, and what's that like, right? And then you can sit like this, and you can sit like that, and you can sit on the floor, and you can stand up, you could lean over to the other side, and you just go, oh, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this, you could do that. Now, it's like a game, right? You give them have a bit of fun with being wiggly and moving in all kinds of directions and seeing how you can sit. Then there's a kind of division point in the teaching. So from that point, either you're going to say, now just let's see what you choose to do. What would you like to do? That's a bit more risky as a teacher. You're a bit more like, I'm out on the territory there if I take that pathway, but it can work extremely well because people coordinate well as a consequence of choice. And we had a wonderful, I think it was the keynote at the beginning of the conference, talking about the research, which is clearly indicating that a way of teaching which gives authority and capacity to the student with guidance is far more effective and easier to do than just trying to tell them what the right thing is. That's been well supported by the research. So you want to give them the choice. Well, what's most comfortable for you? What makes most sense to you? The other pathway at that point is you could say, and out of all these different ways that people play the piano, usually when you watch somebody who's really good at playing the piano, you usually see them sitting kind of like this. So that pathway has got a suggestion in it, right? And you might say to them, well, why do you think that is? Why do most pianists sit like this rather than like that? And given that you're giving them an experience of a variety of the possibilities of what they can do, you'll get some interesting responses to that, right?
Yep. Greg, sorry, I was going to say that analogy then about the rubber band from the chest to the hips. What do you think about that one?
Elastic bands from hips to ribs. That's like this way? I've not actually heard that one before.
No, neither have I have to confess.
What do you mean, like round this way?
Wendy, would you like to respond to that?
This way, is it? This actually very interestingly overlaps with the question about core and core stability, which is a really big question. But suffice it for me to say that if you lean back, your core musculature will go on. Why is that? Because those muscles are here around the abdomen, the abdominal musculature, are working to stop you from falling backwards. You'll be unable to move as freely or to breathe as freely if you're doing that because the muscles are doing a postural job. When you lean a little more forward, you could experiment with this with your own breathing. You're likely to find that the breathing gets deeper and easier, and it gets easier to just stand. And the reason for that is because these big muscles in the back, you know, the definition of core has been evolving over the last 10 years. I've been following the debate. I've even written articles about it, to tell you the truth. So the definition of what the core is has been evolving. And now there are some people who really include this long, deep musculature, the supporting musculature of the back as a part of the core stability idea. We're made to be over the legs, and it's the muscles in the back that do that supporting job, not the ones in the front. So the musculature will always be active to some degree or other. So I'm not saying it goes off, it's there, it's present, but the muscles that are doing the work to support you are the ones in the back, more so than the ones in the front. So I'm not sure about the elastic band. Does it work for you? What kind of response do you get from your kids when you say that?
I'm not sure. I did ask Wendy to unmute, but I'm not sure if she's... Oh, go for it quickly, because we're going to run fairly short.
Sorry to speak over you. It was really just about, as a way of thinking about posture. It's still flexible, it's still movable, but it does relate to core, I think, more than perhaps just general posture.
Yeah. Because the musculature, the direction that you indicated with your fingers, illustrated an action which went this way.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah, and it's not flexing your, it's not pushing back. It's not going back. It is pulling you down. Forward.
Pulling you down in the front, which creates a potential to create some compression there.
Oh, yeah.
We're made to go forward easily with the flexibility of the spine, but fundamentally when you're standing or sitting, that flexibility is in the hip joint or on the sitting bones that we talked about earlier. Your hip joints are generally lower down than what most people feel in the body. So we're not talking about your hips, we're talking about your hip joints. And when you bend forward like that, the weight or the load is supporting over your feet more because you're bending in the relation between your body and your legs. Whereas if we bend here, it's in the spine. Now you're bending in your spine, right? So without going into, but that's kind of my quick response to that question.
Greg, there's bits coming in very thick and fast now.
It always happens
so close to the end. Exactly. One is about lifting of instruments, which I guess we'd probably say is the bending of the knees, but I think I've lost that question now.
I've got a whole pile of information about lifting the instruments.
About moving around instruments, but also then, what's the other one? Oh, and also another one about, at the moment with lockdown, being sitting and playing in front of a computer.
Okay, so
I guess that may be a posture one. So we'll get those two.
Let's quickly address the,
wind it up.
got a couple of minutes, a minute or so. Let's quickly address the support the instrument question. I do want to show you the last slide before we go. See, I've got a ball in my hand that's about 1 kilo, the weight of that. In order to support that ball, I need to be working against gravity. So the muscle work, which is organizing the support of the ball, is going up. And what you'll see with your kids or people with instruments of various kinds is we go this way, is the tendency to be sensing the weight of the object, and the conception of the weight of the object points towards the ground. Your musculature will respond to that conception. So it seems like almost too simple a thing to say, but remarkably effective, to ask your student to sense the weight of the thing, and now to change that thought to the thought of supporting the instrument. The direction of the idea of support goes up. The direction of the idea of weight goes down. And if you're thinking down, the musculature will reduce tone and create kind of heaviness. And if you're thinking up, the musculature will appropriately create enough tone to support the instrument easily. That's the way we're made. I'd love to talk to you more about that.
Okay, and just last slide, I think, and James, I'm sorry we didn't get to yours, but you might want to email Greg separately. Greg, go for that final slide, because we're really running time short.
Okay, so I can keep talking while we do that. This is just an encouragement if you're interested in what I've been talking about in a very straightforward and practical way. If you want to find out a little bit more, we've got a wonderful teacher, classroom music teacher from WA, Anne Clark, who is doing a pilot series for us based on some of this practical information. It's not a depth study. It's something that you can do to explore possibilities and to be in conversation with somebody who has knowledge about that. So you can go to the QR link or find us in the conference sponsors. We have it's in there, or email me. Please do email me if you'd like to ask more questions that have come out of today's session.
Sorry, Greg, you go.
That's all right. That's all right.
We
We need to finish because this is the last session for the whole conference. So congratulations for making your way through the entire conference and surviving. And hopefully it's been really, I certainly have found it inspiring and really useful and interesting, a number of the presentations. I hope this has been interesting and helpful as well. And maybe we'll get to meet one day and talk a little bit more about it. Okay.
Thanks so much, Greg. Goodbye, and we'll see you all in farewell in just a few moments.